The last time Matthew was there, I referred to him as a development economist. I no. Yes, indeed, Mr. Olisa Agbakoba joins us, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, development lawyer. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you.
Well, as everybody else is in this country, we're concerned about the economy in terms of what we need to do to ensure that things move on, aside the other things that the government is focusing on. You've also raised several concerns and made several suggestions as to what we can do. And none of those, no knowledge is waste if is utilized. Let's, again, revisit the economy. We've seen the way things are. But I think by this Thursday, they said the budget will be passed.
Yes.
If the budget is passed, do you think that there will be any difference in the economy?
It depends on the systems and processes in place. But it's good to step back a bit to say where we came from. It's very important. And, we came from a situation of alleged massive corruption of the Jonathan administration. That's the buzzword, that's the sing-song of the APC government. And so they've gone about collecting monies. I can see all the papers saying 3.3 trillion, this, that, everything being collected. So what has happened, I think, is that you have a patient who is anemic, very ill. So you collect blood for him. But you must then ask yourself, when do I give the blood? So you need 2 pints of blood. I have already got 1 pint of blood. Why are you waiting? So there's 3.3 billion, 3.3 trillion, all kinds of monies being collected. The problem is the economy is anemic. And I was watching Lai Mohammed yesterday in your studio, and I was happy he confirmed what I said, because the National Economic Outlook for 2016, as published by the Bureau of Statistics, shows that we'll have negative growth all through last year. When you have negative growth 2 successive quarters, you have recession. But when he said deep, I actually went back and looked and discovered that it was 4. So Nigeria is in deep recession. So that's the diagnosis. So whether the budget will solve it remains to be seen. But I think it's the application of some thinking. What's the economic philosophy of government? I think we all agree communism is not it, socialism is not it. It's got to be some type of capitalism. Well, that's my own personal view, because capitalism has an entrepreneurship. But there are all kinds of capitalisms, at least 4. State capitalism, welfare capitalism, crony capitalism, enterprise capitalism. I'm beginning to think that the entire privatization process was wrong, because not one privatized entity has brought on benefit to Nigerians. So Section 16 of the Constitution says the commanding heights of the economy shall be in the hands of the state. So my first big point would be, maybe we need to revisit privatization.
You mean even the telecoms didn't bring any benefit?
Telecoms was greenfield, so that's a bit different. But what about railways? What about airways? So there are several other state companies that have been privatized. There's nothing. So I would rather say that this budget will succeed if there is some process and some thinking. So if I were advising, the first thing I would do would be to say we need to find a very good value for the dollar-naira parity.
How do we do that?
By just removing the central bank's control. $20 billion was found floating in the banks belonging to Nigerians, doing nothing. That's because they're excluded from the market. I have in my practice maybe $20,000, $40,000 odd dollars. It's lying idle. But if I could trade on it easily, if I could trade on it, like if in the UK, you can just go and buy. If you're going to Europe and you're in the UK, you can just buy euros and you go. You don't need the CBN of the UK to tell you what to do. I think we have to deregulate CBN's control. 1. 2, CBN is not very good at doing 2 things: monetary control and banking supervision. So when the banking crisis around the world occurred, what they did was create specialist institutions to monitor the banks. So I recommend a new institution to do that, the Financial Conduct Authority. They will now get the banks to focus on what they should be doing, lending correctly. Then 3, there's no reason why we should have one interest rate. There's no reason. As you know, it's very high. Now, If you want to do business and you go to a bank and you're doing consumer borrowing, then whatever the bank gives you is fine.
But I think it differs for the agricultural sector. Because it's because they have those special intervention funds.
That's the point. The special intervention funds, but at what rate do they come in? That's the problem. And this is where we talk about quantitative easing, which means that the government has a program whereby they ease the burden by putting money in the system at a controlled interest rate. Now, when that happens, you will find that the banks are able to lend money at a much lower rate. We can't have an economy that will not come out of recession if you have double-digit interest rates.
About the functions of the CBN, because
Yes.
I mean, if yes, they're responsible for the monetary and foreign exchange policies, but then no matter what they do, if it's not complemented with fiscal policy, would they have any results?
That's what I'm saying. Precisely what I'm
That's
saying.
federal government, the fiscal policy.
No, absolutely. I agree with you entirely. I agree entirely. Because you asked, the broad question was, the budget is out on Thursday. Will we see any change? I said, notionally, the budget should stimulate the economy. But the budget will not stimulate the economy if borrowing is at 25%. If NIBOR, the interbank lending rates, overnight rate for money, is at 15, 20%, it's not going to do anything. It's like a woman who has a booker. She tells herself, in fact, it's what I like to call booker economics. She tells herself, I have 200 plates of pepper rice to sell in the morning, and I don't see the demand. So she tinkers with her price, and she gets it right, to the point where maybe there are more people coming, so she can lower the price. So if you use booker-style economics to regulate the Nigerian market, you might get results. All my friends abroad tell me that it is stupendous to think of a market that cannot provide water, that cannot provide the basics. I have been on generator for 7 days. I can afford diesel, so I didn't even know. But do you know what it costs the country to have us run on alternative sources of energy? So the budget is not going to do the trick if all the parameters are not in. So I will advocate that the state, federal government reviews privatization and thinks about how to introduce state capitalism driven by small business. These two, with the right fiscal policies, a very good interest rate regime might begin to do the trick.
Which key sector do you have in mind when you say they should review privatization?
Oh, look at all the big things. Water. Nobody has water. Electricity. I mean, it's so crazy that the government sold all the discos, but the discos are broke. So what you do is just take your thing back. Take it back.
But it's not because they couldn't manage it, that's why they privatized it.
No, because we will not go back to the model of state enterprise, which is where government runs business. It's not successful. But state capitalism means that the government controls how business is done.
You know, what kind of signal will that send if you
Yes.
say the government should take it back? First, a lot of other investors that would be coming into the country
Yes.
would be scared coming into the fray if you took it back.
So you see, if you did a dashboard of investments, there's enough, I can assure you, for everybody to have a role to play. If the OECD countries are themselves the masters of market fundamentalism, but British Airways is owned by the British government, Electricité de France is owned by the French government, and so on and so on. The American economy is 3.45 trillion. 2 trillion is state money, welfare, benefits, unemployment, health. So this notion, my big point is that the notion that government plays no role in how the economic process unfolds is not correct. It isn't correct. And it is very clear that in privatizing, in concessioning, private sector money isn't just there. So government has a role by quantitative easing to bring cheap money and drive the process. And of course involve the private sector. The model that the Chinese have is so perfect. Why is China the world's #1 economy?
But if you look at it, if they say they are broke, for instance, the power sector that you just highlighted.
No, not if I say they are broke.
Okay, if they are, now that they say they are broke,
Yes.
and they're trying to, they've been able to pay some severance, trying for the very first time to see what they can do by refurbishing some of the plants.
Yes.
And now they say they don't have too much money. And you also talked about the monies that have been recovered by this government that is
Yes.
sitting idle somewhere.
Yes.
Shouldn't they be thinking of having that as what they call bailout fund? Recall the economic crisis then in Europe and even in America.
Yes.
How the government bailed out some of these big businesses.
Absolutely.
So can't we use such fund in bailing out these investors in the sector, knowing full well how important power is to us?
That is one way. But my worry is that in having done that, looking back at the 20 odd years of privatization, it's not too easy for me to accept the notion. Initially, I was like a market fundamentalist. But now it's not too easy to accept the notion that a private sector person has the interest of the nation at heart. The purpose of business is to do well and make money, pay your tax and all that. But it's a different thing when you have state capitalism, which means that the government plays a strong role, not exclusive, but a strong role in directing the commanding heights of the economy. I think it will be much better off for us. And that's what happens with China.
They are not asking, I mean, looking at the example of the power sector, they are not asking for bailout. They're saying, make the tariff right. And we've seen,
Make what tariff right when there's no light in the first place? What do you mean by that?
That's the,
make what tariff right?
You
don't give me light and you talk about make tariff
that's
right.
the argument. I mean, the
no,
argument has been which will come first for a lot of people.
Give me the water first.
For a lot of people, the electricity has to come first. From the perspective of the provider, they say that argument is not going to work. That argument cannot work because they must pay certain things.
Why did they go into it in the first place?
So those are some of the arguments.
It's not an argument. Why would you go into a business if you can't fund it? That's the point.